You don't need to be a motorcycle enthusiast to determine that this machine is not in top form, mechanically or cosmetically. But I think one thing, more than anything else, will greatly aid the cosmetic appearance of this motorcycle, and that is if I polish this aluminum part right here. Aluminum is a fairly soft metal, which makes it easy to polish. I've already started on this piece. You can tell the difference here where I've polished and where I haven't. And I wanted to do this project using just materials that I had in the shop. So what I'm using are 180 grit sandpaper, 800 grit sandpaper, soapy water, turtle wax polishing compound, and a rag. The principle behind polishing badly tarnished or even scratched aluminum is to first smooth the surface out and make it free of any scratches, and this is done with a coarser grit sandpaper, and then after that is completed, sand it with finer grit sandpaper to start to bring out the luster, and then finish it off with the polishing compound. So the idea is to start with an abrasive that will take off a lot of material at the expense of leaving the surface rough, and then slowly work up to finer and finer abrasives, finally finishing with an extremely fine abrasive, which is this polishing compound. The best method would probably be to start with something a little bit finer than 180 grit sandpaper to do the initial cut, because the coarser the initial sandpaper is, the deeper the grooves it will leave and the more difficult it will be to clean up with the finer sandpaper. But as I said, this is all I have in the shop, so this is what I'm going to use. I'll start by wet sanding the piece with the 180 grit sandpaper and some soapy water. And I'm going to sand until I don't see any scratches or gouges left in the piece. And you can see after just that little bit of sanding, there are a few holes and gouges and scratches that require further sanding. So I'll just keep sanding until I'm satisfied with how smooth the piece is. I may not get all of the scratches out, but the more scratches I get out at this stage, the better the appearance will be in the end. After about 5 minutes of sanding with the 180 grit paper, here's what it looks like. As you can see, there's still some scratches and divots in it, but I'm not interested in perfection. I'm not interested in spending all afternoon on it. I just want to shine it up a little bit. So after the sanding with the 180 is done, you can see there are some scratches in the surface. And to remove those, we'll go over it with finer sandpaper, the 800 grit. So I'll work on that right now. And I'll just use this sandpaper until I don't see any of the sanding marks that were left behind from the 180 grit. After working on the part with the 800 grit for probably about 15 minutes, I was able to get most of the marks of the 180 off of the piece. A trick that I used to make sure that all of the old sanding marks were gone is when I used the 180 sandpaper, I sanded this way so the marks were running like this, and then when I used the finer grit sandpaper, I sanded in the opposite direction, and then I just sanded until I didn't see any more marks going this way, the first direction. So next, it's just a matter of using this polishing compound to really bring out the shine of the piece. This whole process would have taken a lot less time if I had smaller jumps in sandpaper grit. For example, if I had 180 grit, 220 grit, 320 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit, 800 grit, and 1000 grit, I could just do one sandpaper grit at a time and incrementally step up, and that would probably get the job done quite a bit faster. But as I said in the beginning, all I had in my shop was 2 different types of sandpaper, and I made do with what was available at the expense of taking a little bit more time. And here's what it looks like after a little bit of polishing. And I have to say, it makes this machine look almost as good as it did on the day it rolled off of the showroom floor. Thanks for watching.